So welcome to the International Women's Day UK Fight Club webinar. I'm really excited about hosting this. I am a wargamer of about 25 years, but I only recently came out as one because, you know, the nerd factor is high. So yeah, and there are too few of us women in wargaming. Currently in our subscription, there's only about 2 to 5%. And that needs to change for all sorts of reasons that we're going to cover as part of our game design review this evening. And this evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, we have with us Sayin, who is a final year undergraduate law student at the University of Strasbourg in France. And as part of her undergrad studies at Strasbourg, she joined Basina, which is the Just a Girl part of volunteering program for social equality. So in 2021, she's participated in the NATO S&T for Disruptive Technologies tabletop exercise, or D3TX, to those who know it, and as an assistant facilitator, which was her first experience in wargaming. So that's a year now, isn't it, Ada? So we're all good, a year in.
Yeah.
And she's participated in various simulations, including NATO's SAS 151 Alpha and Bravo tests. And same year, she became the design team lead for the Women in Command project, funded by the US Embassy in Ankara. So Ada is here to talk in that context this evening, and she'll be speaking first. We also have the wonderful Dr. Jill S. Russell. Google her with the S because it makes a difference. She's an independent scholar and consultant for wargaming. Jill is rather overqualified in lots of things. She has a PhD in war studies from King's College London, an MPhil in military studies history from Georgetown University, and she's got 2 further degrees, a master's in international relations from Johns Hopkins, and her first degree, which was a BA in history at Dartmouth College in the US. She has also been chairman, we discussed this earlier, of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs for the annual crisis sim in the US, VP of the Marine College, Vice President of the Marine College, Commander-in-Chief for the joint exercises, and she's done like multiple wargaming consultancy work for the Naval War College, KCL in London, Shrivenham, and referee in more places than we can shake sticks at. So we've got 2 really good people this evening coming from very different directions. I myself, my interest is in design thinking from different perspectives as well. So that's where I'm going to be.
Let's go back to merging.
So I think somebody's on. If you could just mute your mics, that'd be great. Thanks very much. So Ada, introducing you, and you're a year into wargaming now as a law student, and we're talking about different ways of thinking as well on International Women's Day. So how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated. In Turkey, where I'm from, we're not really used to studying these type of concepts, and especially military or, defense, peace and security related ones. So growing up, I was kind of one of the lucky ones. I had the chance to participate in different, conferences, different international simulations, etc. But then I kind of lost my wish to study these types of domains, because whenever I tried to talk about anything defense related or politics related, I was kind of looked down upon, because it was more of a men's subject or boy subject, especially when I was, in high school. So I kind of put that idea behind me, and then I said, okay, I'm just going to study law. I'm just going to kind of continue with what I wanted to do initially. And it kind of like fell off my head. I didn't really think about it. But when I entered Basina, I started to work in, social media campaigns or, just YouTube related stuff. And one day, like on Slack, I saw Basina's coordinator, Becky Chaplu's message on who wants to write crisis injects for a NATO crisis game. a serious war game. And I said, okay, so I have some experience on the subject. Maybe I can do it. Let me just check this out. And I said, okay, I can do it. And when I just got into it, I realized that I had an interest in the subject. And I just realized that, okay, maybe this can actually happen something. This can lead the way through something. And especially when I participated to watch the war game simulation, I was very amazed by the officers, men and women working together, their way of approaching things, their discipline, their ways of response to certain actions. And I said, okay, maybe this is where I want to, go in the future. Luckily, about a couple of months later, because Basina's Women in Command project started, and I was appointed as the lead war game designer, and that's how I kind of got into these things.
Brilliant. So do you want to take us through the Kizbashna project that you've done with the Women in Command? And
absolutely. If you would like to, I can just kind of start by introducing the Women in Kizbashna really quickly. So it means just a girl in English, and we're a women's rights NGO from Turkey. We took our name, just a girl, from a counter hate speech where the meaning comes from very generalized sayings in Turkish, and I believe it's kind of possible to hear it pretty much everywhere. Like, you're just a girl, you cannot do that. You're just a girl, you cannot go there. But our slogan in Kızbaşına is, you can do it because you are a girl, you are a woman. And we were established in 2017 in Ankara, and we tackle inequalities women face on a daily basis through projects, social media campaigns, and workshops. Every day, we kind of name ourselves as the R&Ds of NGOs in Turkey. We always look for the first ways to do something. And every day we look for new and innovative ways to fight inequalities women face. Whether it's microaggressions, workplace inequalities, domestic violence, or even femicides. And in early 2021, by seeing more and more political and armed conflicts with humanitarian consequences happening right before our eyes, with some research, we came to the realization that women and children are the ones that get hurt the most because of poor crisis management, just oversight, or pure neglect by decision makers. And through research and through a lot of work, we realized that it's proven actually that the only way to prevent this is by having women in charge as decision makers. And then we looked at official numbers in Turkey, and they say that the number of women workers in defense is close to 40%. However, when we take a look at those who have a seat at these, senior executive decision-making tables, it's less than 7%. And then with the aim of empowering women in peace and security domains, and for a peaceful future, the Women in Command project brought to life the Hybrid Threat Rising war game, which is the first Turkish war game with the theme of hybrid warfare, and was developed for the purpose of directly training female leaders.
Brilliant. So who was your sponsor, and how did they ask you for this game, and where did you start?
So through this, we've been funded by the US Embassy of Ankara, and they've been actually really helpful. We had, through the summer, while we were preparing our project, actually, normally it was supposed to end in October 2021, but by talking with them and actually seeing the work we've done over the summer and seeing the potential of our project, we came to the realization with them that the project could bring into life so many more things, actually, like this conference or any other thing that happened. And then we decided to postpone our project. We've been actually in touch with them quite frequently, whether it's to get kind of the American aspect and whatnot.
Cool. So you've actually created a game now, which you presented at Connections, didn't you, I believe? And how did you go about the design of that? What was your process?
So we started to design the game at the beginning of summer 2021, around maybe May, June. And we started by actually coming up with a bunch of learning objectives, because this is a beginner-friendly game to introduce more and more women into these concepts. We wanted it to be very educative, but at the same time, not really, boring or not really long. So after having established our learning objectives, we then looked at different games about the conflict we had in hand. We decided to take the 2014 Ukraine-Russia situation, their conflict, and we played many different games, whether it's Brian Train's game, whether it's very, known games like Twilight Struggle or Root. So we looked at how those games first took different concepts and how they came to use those different concepts with different mechanics. And then we kind of continue to develop our game day by day, playtesting every day, so that we could actually have it ready by the end of the summer. So we've been, through this time, we've been working with Tom Fisher from Imaginetic as our mentor, as well as Girls Security's Lauren Brita. So they've been actually mentoring us and helping us develop the game as well.
That's fantastic. And I really like the idea of playtesting every day, because I do think that's part of the design process. Obviously, with the design thinking, and Jill and I were talking about this earlier, there's a clear 5-rule process where you have your sponsor come in and say, look, this is the problem. And so you empathize to start with and look at the problem and interview and go through it into depth. And then you have the defining the problem. So then you have the problem defined. And then it's the ideas bit, isn't it? So, and I think this is where this evening we can talk about widening the pool of people with ideas, and to say that you don't have to have a wargaming background in order to contribute and have really good ideas in a mentoring process. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I think it was one of the things that you said in our latest meeting. I believe you said that we don't only need space or inclusivity, but actually being welcomed. And after the meeting, this made me think about all the times I was so lucky to be welcomed in this industry. And I thought about the people who are experts in their fields, with maybe 20, 30, even more years of experience, who welcomed me and my team by continuously saying, helping us, what do you think? How do you want to proceed? Or what should we do right now? And I thought about, Tom Fisher, who had mentoring meeting with us about every day for 3 months. I thought about Lauren Brita and Dr. Yuna Wong, who mentored us in the best ways possible, Arnell David and, UK Fight Club, as well as Sebastian Bay, who connected us with the most inspiring and amazing women. And having the chance to meet with the welcoming and, inspiring people really made me invest myself even more into this, and really made me, be happy and satisfied with the work that I do.
And so who did you have on your design team apart from yourself as a law student? So that's a different way of thinking background already. So who else did you have?
Yeah, so we had graphic designers, and we had, since in Turkey, wargaming is not really done by college students or, young adults. We had pretty much game designers or, graphic designers or people who were really interested in gaming, not serious gaming, not educational gaming, but generally gaming, any type of gaming, who could understand how to deliver different outcomes, who could understand, how to make a game a game.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So the next stage is obviously the 4th and 5th stage, which is prototyping and testing.
Yeah.
And you did that every day.
Yeah, exactly.
How long?
We did that for 3 months, I believe, the whole summer. So pretty much we would wake up in the morning, we would finish the last graphic changes from the night before, and then in the afternoon with the team we would gather up to play test maybe what we thought was the weakest point of the game, weakest part of the game, sorry, or what we thought was the most important part but had some changing, what we were not most confident in. So we play tested every day in the afternoon, and then at night we started to implement those changes. And I said this before, I believe, but since you're designing the game, playtesting is at the beginning it's fun because you're kind of into it, but through the end, it becomes almost heartbreaking because you put so much time and effort into certain mechanics, and actually changing them or just seeing them not work, seeing them break the game literally breaks your heart. And that's why right now we actually have a different playtesting team, about 20 people, as well as we also do international playtests, but we have just a separate team for playtesting now so that they can actually, playtest, see what's wrong, and then deliver us the results so that we don't have to get our hearts broken.
Well, that's really interesting. So who's part of your playtesting team?
Again, we have actually, again, a lot of gamers, because their input really matters to us. But in order to kind of put our playtest team together, we also wanted to include our demographic for the Women in Command project. So a lot of law students, international relations students, political science students, just so we could understand what works with the game, what can they actually learn when we start our project.
Yeah, and that's really, I was just about to ask you about demographic and what sort of age group?
So of the Women in Command project or the playtest team?
Well, just the playtesters. So you said they're actual students, so I'm guessing they're in their early 20s, mid-20s.
Yeah. So we have from 18 to 30. We have also very experienced, war game designers or serious game designers that we playtest with. So yeah.
Perfect. Jill, we were talking earlier, before we came on, Jill and I were having a bit of a chat and a catch up, as we do. And we were saying about the political scientist inputs, weren't we, within a framework, and whether or not their inputs now need to be wargamed and need to be tested more, especially in light of the current situation. I mean, how many people genuinely had a full invasion of Ukraine on their bingo card for February 2022?
Probably not that many, but I think also if you wargamed more or put people through this, just more broadly put people through risk thinking and decision forcing exercises, they would at least come to not be so surprised when the thing which wasn't on their bingo card occurs. Because in all of these human sort of experiences, somebody's going to come along and throw a curveball that you just won't be expecting. And what something like gaming does for you, in the same way that, say, reading a lot of history or reading a lot of literature, what a gaming will do for you is it'll let you see all the ways that something will fail or come out differently than you expect. And so you don't have to be right, or the political scientists didn't need to be right. But if they had tested the thinking more in this way, perhaps they wouldn't be so problematically wrong, as in, this is unimaginable and therefore it couldn't happen. It's not well covered under our model. And so understand where the gaps in the model are, and probably don't be monomodular in your international relations thinking. So it may never get you to the point where you could see this coming, but it would get you to the point where once you sort of got punched in the face with something you didn't expect, you'd respond pretty well. Like, oh, okay, yeah, sometimes
we have a response.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, and resources are set up to deal with that punch in the face, so to speak. Yeah. Well, I think also as well, what's important here is, the wider thought processes of those people who were in that testing group, of maybe the actual not just the diversity of gender and thought, because women will see war differently, majoritively to men, but also cultural backgrounds and differences as well. So we need people who are from those cultural backgrounds of different age groups and different ethnicities to actually do those injects to make our game designs better and more robust.
Well, and also it offers the opportunity to see perhaps non-mirroring tactics and strategies to respond to crises. One of I think the more interesting examples recently was how Danny Cotton managed in the aftermath of the Grenfell tragedy. Because what she realized is that the essential problem she's going to face isn't with managing this particular fire. That was going to be well in hand. What the problem was going to be was within the institution, how her firefighters were going to deal with this tragedy. And so she very quickly decides to make, the traumatic response one of the key features of her leadership in the immediate aftermath. I'm not sure if you didn't have a woman in the room for something like that, that would be the first thought that people would have of what should this senior leader of the London Fire Brigade be doing in something like Grenfell. I think a natural inclination would be to say, oh, the leader should be getting in there and getting into the firefighting and taking over the operational command, even though it was well in hand, or be thinking in ways that are very orthodox to these kinds of endeavors. And we saw this at your DSET on the eve of the pandemic, when Enzo was talking about Welsh Fire and how it changes when women start becoming firefighters, and it shifts to becoming about how do we prevent fires?
Yeah.
Not just how are we the best firefighters, but how do we avoid having to do this in the first place? And you see a long, slow shift in the capabilities and the ways that the firefighting service is working in South Wales, such that they had to go back and start thinking about, well, we actually need to polish up our tactical capabilities.
Yeah.
So when you add women in, they change things in ways I think that nobody really expects before it happens. They're not just men in women's suits.
I think that's really interesting. So I saw a tweet earlier, and I do think we do think differently. So wargaming for women can be about the prevention of war, as in peacekeeping, as much as dealing with the actual tactical maneuvers of a war in progress or the aftermath. And one of the tweets I saw earlier said, there was a third woman who's become an officer in the infantry, UK Army infantry. And they said, women will soon consume us, which I thought was quite a strong statement, as if it was a threat. And I do think, there's comments in here from Gordon, the difference in our attitude to how we approach things, that people feel genuinely comfortable with what they know and the approach that they know and the training that they know. And so therefore the difficulty can be, as a group of women in wargaming or in armed forces or in critical thinking or strategy, is we always do this anyway as women in our lives. I think we compromise and we make sure that they feel welcome and say, this is not a threat to you. This is absolutely the opposite. What we want to do is make everything better and to add value. So Ado, is that something that you guys discussed when you were looking at the women in command?
Yes, absolutely. When we looked at different, research, outcomes and different statistics, it always showed us that with inclusion of women, we are better trained and we are a lot better prepared. And in this case, gender advisors are not enough, but we actually need women's aspect and women's way of thinking on those tables. And I also agree with what you just said about that tweet on, inclusion of women and actually preparing for peace and security. While facilitating the game and teaching the game, we realize that it's less about actually winning wars. And we think that it's less about actually winning wars, but more about training and preparing for the protection of the people. And with the tragedies that are happening in especially Ukraine right now, sadly showed us more in a civilian aspect, that we don't know war and we do not expect war. We saw some of our games event cards sadly actually happening in real life before our eyes. Just one of the examples is the We Can Do It card, which depicted women joining the military forces to defend their country and their people. That's when our game became a reality to us. And for us, that was the moment of a reality check on the importance of what we are doing and importance of the inclusion of women.
Well, I mean, right now in Ukraine, 20% and more of the armed forces are women.
Yeah.
Which, you know, higher than anywhere else in the world right now, as far as I know. In the UK, it's 15% for the RAF, 12% for the Navy, and 9% for the Army. I think it's a bit better in the US, isn't it, Jill? But not by much. So I think it's about 12 for US.
12 or 13 is the last number I think I saw. One thing I wanted to circle back to, I'd hate for, I think it's a lot to put on women to say that, well, once you get included into national security, it's your job to prevent wars. And I am particularly a woman who doesn't work either in feminist specified theory or peace and security, women, peace and security. It is important to include women in peace building things because they are parts of the societies which have to come back together in order for the conflict to end. But I'd like to pitch for women being important to making for more effective uses of power. Sometimes those uses of power might come in the application of humanitarian capabilities. It might sometimes be more powerful to feed people and care for them than to kill them and to break things. But I'd also like to argue that women are very important to include in the thinking about the application of force. And to be part of that phase as well, that we aren't just here to, well, if we include women, then they will stop the men from fighting. Like, no, that's not necessary. That's a lot to put on us, unless you put us in charge fully of everything. But also that's a limitation on women to say that, well, you need to do the cleaning up stuff and you need to do the prevention stuff, but the stuff in the middle, not quite for you, or that is somehow not an acceptable place for women to be. Like, we also need to be thought of as like, damn, she's good in strategy.
Yeah.
She's gonna win that war. And winning the war, it does include a just and smart and effective peace that wraps up society and takes care of the least members of it. That is how you win the whole war, because war isn't just on the battlefield. So that I just wanted to throw that in there for the.
No, I 100% agree with that. I mean, both of you have said that, you know, the more effective uses of power and the prep for the training and protection of people, that actually allows our armed forces to be more effective, because if that is taken care of, I mean, look at the urban environment at the moment. There's an awful lot going on about urban warfare training, and how do we do that in an urban environment with an insurgency or a resistance, depending on your point of view of who's there. Well, it's true, isn't it? And so then you allow the armed forces to have more freedoms almost to operate in those environments with less civilian casualties, or at least with corridors for escape and things like that, or systems that are already set up so that civilians can be looked after medically and humanitarily. We've got a couple of comments in the chat. So Gordon Jones, in my experience as a customer of Wargaming output who's never managed to find a way to get a foot in the door of the community. The focus and outputs is on the delivery of force solutions rather than the achievement of strategic goals, which must include neutralization of an opponent and implementation of peace. Is this because of the expectations of the customer? Well, yeah. I mean, simply, I think if you don't have those injects that challenges what their goal is, when you get a sponsor for a game who says this is what we want, the very first thing you do is actually sit down with them and investigate what they think they want. So Una Wong, who you quoted earlier, Ada, had a really good example on one of her talks where she said, if you were looking at disabled people moving around a town, and the goal is they want to be able to move more freely up steps and things like that. I think the thing was this person with crutches needs to move around more. Well, the problem isn't do they need to move around more. It actually meant what they really wanted was they wanted to be able to socialize more. They wanted to get to places where they could socialize with their friends. So then that was the actual goal rather than the actual movement piece, or the force, if you like, the actual kit and stuff. So then they came up with different solutions and different ideas on how to do that actual goal. So I do think right at the beginning of the design phase, it's not a challenge to say when the sponsor says this is what we need. It's right, okay, let's really deep dive on what you are actually trying to achieve, and then we'll come up with ideas for the game design to actually solve that. What are your thoughts on that, Jill or Ada?
Coming from a military affairs perspective, I think perhaps some of the problem with is that the strategic goal has been very static and rigid and defined. There isn't a whole lot of creativity at the strategic level. I mean, if you look at NATO, for example, and how it would have thought about how it was going to fight over the course of the Cold War. The strategic level stuff doesn't change. So I think people sort of get into a mindset of that stuff is fixed, or those games are for other people at other times. I am frequently a strategy taker. And games of thinking about strategy look very different and are very, they're softer kind of things. I don't know, or I don't know if there's a game that really gets you to think about strategy.
Well, I played a game the other day, and I'm going to ask Arnold to jump in because I played it with Arnold and Ed and Andrew. We went to a pub, and I was the honey badger, and it was a strategy game based in a forest with animals. Arnold, what was the name of that game?
It was Rude. Ada had mentioned it.
Yeah.
I think they use it to play test and get some ideas, I believe, when they were making Women in Command. But yeah, we had a good time playing Rude. It's kind of a counterinsurgency, asymmetric strategy game. So we'll probably do more of that in Fight Club.
Yeah.
Well, but then that's the strategy is defined. I guess my point. What that question wanted was how do we,
So it's other outputs in the delivery of force solutions rather than the achievement of strategic goals.
If you've known what the strategic goals are, if the strategic goals are sort of always largely the same, then I think sometimes it's been hard to get people to think creatively about, well, we know what they are. So it's really about refining this tactical level, I guess is where I've been trying to send that comment, if that makes sense.
I think in the game Root, for example, it was good because there were 4 different strategies all playing against each other, with 4 different strategic goals. I was isolated. I was one badger. Can't believe I've said that in my lifetime before. And Arnold, you were birds, weren't you? I think, or was that Andrew?
I was the Woodland Alliance, the little mice running around. But
Yeah,
I think
Andrew was birds.
Jill has a good point though. I mean, so I'm a U.S. Army strategist, and trying to exercise creativity and our imagination from these games to think about the art of the possible. And I think one way of doing that, and maybe you need to talk to it, is like I looked at your report from your hybrid threats matrix game that you guys did recently. Is that those matrix games, the structured arguments, and how those games are executed, can help tee up what could be test out your goals and objectives and have this interplay between actors in this game to see what might emerge spontaneously from different teams coming up, interacting in a different way in these matrix games. We ran one last year with Fight Club called Operation Maelstrom. And to our surprise, like, it was really interesting to watch human behavior between the teams, interpret their strategy and their goals and how their actions were being interpreted by the other actors, and watching this human dynamic where everyone interpreted their stuff to be really good. And that the way we adjudicated, we didn't say whether or not one person's actions were successful or not. We created these news stories from BBC and from from different we did a lot of Photoshop stuff, and everyone interpreted their activity to be like, oh, we won, we got the. So I think it's playing out right now in the information environment. It's like no one's really certain how things are being interpreted. We don't want to assume that our actions were interpreted by Russians or whoever a certain way. That we really need to do some deeper thinking about that and understand those human dynamics. But Ada, maybe you want to talk to that matrix game you guys recently ran and what you learned from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just right before, to circle back to the Roots game, because it's something that we were very passionate about as design team. I think it shows really well how different players can have different, strategies and can have different winning conditions, which was one of the things that we took for our game as well. In our game, we have the red player who wins by territorial control. So they will try to actually control cities to show that they support them. And the blue player who wins by prestige. So they will try to eliminate red units to show that they are actually, powerful and capable of defending themselves from the enemy. And on the Matrix game, well, it started as just looking at our game in the light of recent events, and just seeing that our game sadly became outdated. And through our series of sessions with Georgetown University's Wargaming Society, we decided to kind of come together with women and go through these matrix games as well. So what we did was we took the event cards from our game and we emptied them, and then we changed them into different matrix arguments. And the outcome was actually really interesting to us, but because it depicted very well what was happening and sadly what was about to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, Jill, have you got thoughts on that, on having different winning lines for different players within the game? Like, there's not a straightforward win. It depends on who you are and what your goals are.
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I mean, I really like that idea. I wish I had something smart to say right now, but I was just sort of thinking about, taking these and taking different sort of approaches and perspectives and playing them out. And again, from a practitioner usage point of view, i.e., I'm not just doing this, not just for fun, but for practitioners, to be able to press different levers and see what happens when you take different approaches and rehearse different ways of doing it, I think is valuable, and maybe something that often gets lost in at least what I've seen of American wargaming in armed forces situations, where it's very heavily scripted of what you're going to do, which way you're going to go, it's all sort of very heavy upon you, what is expected. And so this ability to test out and put on different uniforms, as it were, and test different scenarios and to see them through.
I was kindly invited to be a guest lecturer at Bath University with Dr. John Curry and his wargaming students. And the interesting thing about his course is that they were drawn from different majors. So again, there were law students, there were criminologists, there were gamers, there were IT modelers, there were psychologists, and there were English students. But they were all interested. And I have to say, the room was the most diverse room I've seen in this environment anywhere, ever, actually. And they were all under the age of 23, from multiple different backgrounds, different languages, and it was 40% women. And it was because of the approach of being completely inclusive with that, to break the bias. So the whole thing of International Women's Day is the hashtag is break the bias. And I think that's what we do need to look at doing in our wargaming, both in our approach, instead of like red versus blue, with, you know, if you lose more forces or whatever, in a very traditional approach, you know, you're the loser. But, you know, wargaming, losing is learning. So that's always not a bad thing. But I was just going to make a point, because we've got a question in to say, how would we factor in target audience analysis into game design or planning, particularly to the female population? So how would we target women?
See, I was just thinking about that because Ada said something about how she got into it. She read a flyer and was like, "Ooh, I would like to participate in that." And I mean, that's how I did the first SyncX with the Marine Corps. Was I was at SICE, and Elliot Cohen knows everybody, and so everybody who needed volunteers for all the things that they were doing would send stuff to his office. And I saw the sign. I was like, I want to do that. And I just wonder if maybe those of us women who kind of go, ooh, that's interesting, and take ourselves along to something, maybe what I should have done is bring 2 friends who don't see the sign, but might actually get interested. Because and again, I don't remember way back when, but I don't know what the entries are to saying this to young women, except that once you get there, it's much more interesting than you ever realize it is on the outside. I mean, I studied logistics, it's really fascinating, but on the outside, it looks really boring. So maybe what it needs to be is that, you know, when a young woman sees something and goes along, she takes 2 friends, or she tells 2 friends about it, or something like that.
That's how we bring people in. So I'll do a full disclosure as well as to how I got into wargaming, because I don't think any of the guys know really. But whilst I was at uni, I went to a house party and there was wargaming going on in one room, and they asked me to be one of the op 4. So that's literally how I did it. I just happened to be there and just really enjoyed it, and just went back the next week when there wasn't a house party, and we just did wargaming, and I was 20 years old. So I think you can fall into it, but I also think there's the context. So we are affiliates with Women in Games, and one of the difficulties we've had is we invite women speakers who are in gaming to come and talk at DSET, for example, but we get refused because it's about defence. And there is the perception of, and I am old enough, I was one of the last people to go and sit at Greenham Common and sing a couple of songs as well, that traditionally we're supposed to be against war and everything else, and we are. Nobody wants a sodding war unless, you know, they have issues. We don't want war, but that doesn't mean that those of us that protest against it can't participate in the defence of our populations and people and countries and infrastructure and everything else. So I think there needs to be a change in narrative to look at what defence forces do. And I mean defence in the widest sense. So Jill, you raised Antarctic Fire Angels earlier. They're a group of 6 female firefighters, Ada, who are skiing to the South Pole next year. UK firefighters. They're amazing women. And I mean that level of defence, and extending it into the police, extending it into our medical services. because this is all about defence, civil defence. And maybe if we say, look, this is defence, it's not just Army, Navy, Air Force, then that narrative and that can change the way that our future participants and our younger women can come and join in more easily. I mean, Ada, you're in that demographic. I'm way out of it. What do you think?
Yeah,
Me too.
absolutely. I think what was said before was very correct. I think it's, wargaming, especially inclusion to defense, is like a kind of like a getaway drug. Once you get into wargaming, you kind of get a lot into it. And on the subject of designing war games for women who aim to get women interested in them. For example, for our project, we had the subject matter experts feed the knowledge to our, women designers, who were like about 90% of our design team, who were also like our target audience. And our argument is that we use it as a learning tool. So it's for when women look into the game, when they see the game on, any of the announcements we make, they don't get really terrified by it, because that's how I would feel if I saw something that was so, different to me, who seemed to be so complex. We say it's about learning, and it's about education, and it's about practice. And for example, for the Women in Command project, we always had the idea and question of how can we include more women? That's like the whole subject of the project. And our social media, channels, they have about 2 million reach. And once we set out our rhetoric on education and, helping women build themselves and empowering themselves and learning on the subject matter and entering, a men's club, we had over, 350 applications, because they were no longer intimidated by it. Yeah. We invited them, but we also explained to them, this is okay. This is something that is very doable. You're no different than any other men in the industry who is actually doing it.
That's a really good point. I think, yeah, so it's changing the language as well.
Yeah.
And it also goes into the design of games as well, doesn't it? To the actual delivery of games as well, changing that language that you use when you're actually playing the game as well. So you're still achieving the strategic goal of the sponsor, but you might have changed the language along the way to actually fit who you need to include in that. Jill, so you've answered the question in the chat. So you worked with the police, didn't you, for wargaming in the UK?
Well, not wargaming, but I wanted to do a staff ride for the London riots of 2011. And again, you could look at it as sort of precursor wargaming work, which is putting them back into the situation of the evening, and the first evening and the succeeding evening, and showing critical moments and decisions, and asking, even in the fullness of retrospect in time, what do you do in this exact moment? So that you can provide inputs to a game that, if you really do have to start thinking about, like, well, how do I deal with this kind of a chaotic situation in an urban setting? You have realistic conditions to go back and check criticisms or expectations. Like, one of the things that's really powerful in the terrain on the first night off Tottenham High Road is the police are in a line and the rioters are in another line, and the rioters are just pitching missiles at the police. And the police are criticized that evening for being too timid or not being competent in their tactics. And what they realized, what people understood afterwards from people on the ground, was we knew there were side roads. And if we put this, we didn't have enough people to cover the side road. And if we passed the side road, the rioters would be able to come around and cut us off. So this wasn't anything that could be seen in the videos. This was they were being criticized for not taking this move. but putting somebody into that space in that moment would make them see that you have to take account of micro terrain, so that then when you build a game that thinks about something like urban warfare, you don't take for granted the very detailed terrain that you will be dealing with.
Yeah.
And how it is very different from what you might see at a macro level when you're actually standing on the street, because that alleyway may not show up on your Google map, but it's there. And if you can't think in those kinds of dimensions. So I worked with getting them to use their experience to then help them think more deeply, and to help other people like the armed forces think more deeply with more granular detail from that experience about how to deal with these circumstances.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's right at the beginning of the phase, isn't it, of the design, the interviewing process, the staff rise, the battlefield tours, if you like, if people understand that reference. We've got a question, which actually we've had chats about this offline beforehand. So, how and what role does culture play a part in the game design process? I'm going to start with you, Ada, because you're split across 2 cultures right now as well. Well, 3 with your sponsor. So, how are you finding it?
Yeah, sure. I think having more cultures bringing ideas together can only help the process. And what we have seen so far working with different stakeholders, from a lot of different organizations, we saw that different ideas make the game a lot better. And especially in the design team, having like a Turkish point of view, and then working with Canada, with Imaginetic, having the Canadian point of view, and then working with, a lot of different national organizations, it just made the process a lot more inclusive in the end.
I would say from experience as well, with doing more international wargaming, and I've lived abroad a lot, including in Russia, in Kiev, that unless you understand the local viewpoint in some detail, or their local motivations, then you can't factor that in to your actual gaming properly. And so therefore you're never going to have a completely accurate output, but you could have an output that is more true than others. And to do that, you need to have the local culture that you're actually going to be wargaming around involved. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. Jill?
I agree with that. I just historically speaking, it's probably the most difficult thing to do, to make your actions impact. Make your actions have an effect upon another population in a way that is useful to you in war, unless you're giving them things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, force acts upon people in ways that even the people themselves won't know until the moment is upon them.
Right.
So I think it's important, but it's not. But the idea of how culture affects game design, like I would love to see, say, US forces playing a Turkish designed game.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, because I wrote, I'm a strategic culture person. So I believe very firmly that there are national influences upon how we do things. And it would be very useful, I think, to force different cultures to interact with games that are different from ones they might have experience of. And so where, sometimes diversity and inclusion is good, sometimes too, keeping that inject in a singular form, so that you can force others to interact with something very different from what they're used to, also could be really cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really cool. And There are some people in here who work in NATO, and I've worked with NATO as well, and I've had both sides of the table where one side of the table's gone, oh, it's absolutely brilliant having like the French and the Italian and the US view all in the same room because we can work together and work things out. Then I've had the other side, which is like, oh, we've got the French and the Italian and the US view in the same room and they can't freaking agree to anything. So and it just stultifies things because everybody has to compromise too much. So I think it's really interesting, but I do think we definitely do need different cultural inputs into maybe the same game done with different cultural inputs and different gender inputs to see how that plays out. And yeah, Jill, I think that's a really good thing. That would be some good R&D right there to look at what the outputs are of people playing each other's games. Gordon Jones has had his hand up for a bit. Do you want to come in and ask a question, Gordon?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tess. Actually, the bit you've just been talking about there was something that I've been toying around in my head for a bit now, and I'd be interested to know if anyone. So, first question, which is literally just coming to my head as you've been talking there, has anyone ever actually looked at? Here is the same. So, for example, here is root. Go away and create a war game that you think would be beneficial, but giving it to different cultures. And then finding out what comes back as the result from each. So give it to France, give it to America, give it to the UK, get them all to go away and come up with something, and then bring it together and see what the different war games that they come up with, or the strategic policy games, or whatever it is that they come up with look like, to then be able to start dig into that question of what are the cultural differences between all of those different wargaming societies, communities and things like that, and what's the difference in what they come up with. Has anyone ever looked at that?
I don't know of anything. I don't know of anything that's looked at that. But with what's the goal? Is it to provide a more effective game and therefore better outcomes, or a list of different outcomes, so that we're prepared, like we were going right back earlier, that we're prepared for multiple outcomes rather than just the few that would come out of a standard approach to this? Or is it so that we work better together as allies because we understand each other culturally and where we're coming
exactly
from?
To gain that cultural understanding between each other of, hey, so we all started with exactly the same game, but you came up with this and you came up with that and you came up with this and you had these assumptions about this, but we had these assumptions about this, and that, those are diametrically opposed assumptions about this particular interaction. What do we need to do in terms of a strategic policy plan within NATO, say, to actually allow us to be able to counteract the fact that our two nations think about this so radically differently? Because that would be an opportunity within this diverse, and do the same thing of give the same game to a female-led group and a male-led group and a group led by, an LGBT particular society or community or something like that, and see what comes back from those organizations as well, from those different strategic planning things, and get that, because all of those are going to give you different things, and effectively that also gives you your evidence that all of the stovepiped strategic planning processes are wrong. And no one's going to listen until you manage to find the evidence to be able to point to it and say, because until then, trust me, as someone who's worked in DNI for a long time, they are not going to listen to you until you find evidence that empirically proves that they're wrong.
Well, we'd have to be invited in first, wouldn't we?
If I could, I would.
Did you find any friction, as in good friction, on approaches in your team, or was it like quite harmonious in terms of the different cultural perspectives that were when you were putting the game together?
Yeah, so when you were just again talking about the Roots game and how it could be played by different people, when we first started to play the game, I was actually playing with the co-founder of Basina, Chaplin, who is also the chair of NATO's SAS 129 working group and now SAS 172, who is, very evidently and obviously experienced in the area. And we both, played the same characters over a couple of different games, and our approach was completely different. So it kind of showed how a person from no defense related background could have a whole different approach and could still win. And, you know, someone from defense and who has played like many more war games could still win as well. While we were playing the game in, you know, with our design team, as well as the events that we do, we sometimes play with people from, you know, New Zealand or the Americas or Canada, and the approach is somehow always different. We see that they visualize the game or the different outcomes of the game in different ways. And I usually facilitate the game, so it's always kind of amazing to see how different women from different parts of the world with, you know, different backgrounds and educations can think in different ways, but still come to win the game, or, you know, understand the concepts of the game, even as beginners.
So we've got a cheeky comment in the chat, which I think we need to respond to. So do you know someone called Burke Capley?
Yeah.
Says, Ada cheats a lot. Sad face. Well,
I did not cheat. That I did not cheat. I refuse that comment.
I just want to say, in the Butler house, you're allowed to cheat as long as you don't get caught. That is one of the rules.
Okay, then I might have, but they should have read the rules better, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. So the cheating is, and that's the thing as well. Cheating is actually part of the game. That's what somebody will do unexpectedly. They're not my rules, mate. You made them up. I don't have to follow them. And I think that's also one of the things where we can interpret things differently, which is, you know, what it is like in wargaming, or transfer that to real life. You know, borrow a tractor, steal another person carrier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cheating.
That's ingenuity.
Yes. Well, I would say ingenuity as well, Jill, but others may differ. Obviously, your friend in the chat differs. So we've got question from Ant Sharman. Nice to see you this evening, Ant. I think we've started to cover this, and we've covered this a bit. How do we create space at the table for women in wargaming? Maybe we just need to be running some of these things more, so that actually we're creating space for men and women at the table, and saying that everybody is welcome, and that whole thing about different backgrounds doesn't matter. In fact, it's a bonus. And I don't think that message has got out there yet.
I mean, I don't think we need to really have to worry about sophisticated or very advanced problem solving on this. The first thing needs to be noticing presence and absence. We're not even at a point where it is commonly accepted for men to recognize that not having women in a room is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So if we could just move to that point. So it's just sort of noticing, well, on this list of people on this talk, there's no women. That's not acceptable. My invitees, every time I tweet something to a group of professionals, am I including? Like, let's just get to a very simple thing of noticing absence.
Yes, noticing absence is a really good thing. I'm going to come on to a couple of other things that are really interesting, and something that I don't know if most people here will have read Caroline Criado Perez's book on The Invisible Woman. And the question in the chat is about AI and looking at how that's actually going to change things in wargaming. So my first input into that is that we are copy and pasting AI from the 80s and 90s that already exclude women in the data. So the first thing we've actually got to do before we worry about whether AI will replace us or not is actually fixing the AI. Jill, have you got thoughts about that?
I mean, I don't know necessarily the dates, but I mean, AI has terrible flaws when it comes to thinking about not white men. Unfortunately, I don't know a better way to describe it, but it has problems on race. It has problems on gender and sex. It has problems, you know, on different ethnicities, different. And again, it's who writes things. You know, the author is in control, who's writing the code. There's a whole lot of other problems with AI. I would prefer we avoid it, just even if it were perfect. But it's so terribly flawed in many directions, and very many probably women directions. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's worked in simulation and and training for nearly 25 years, one of the questions I always ask first of all is, where did the AI come from? Where's your data from? Did you create it? What sources did you get it from? And I think that's super important. Ada, did you look at where you were sourcing your material and go on, Jill?
Could I just circle back on something? Because again, I think it gets to this diversity issue. Is one of the things I thought about once of the flaw with AI is humans experience pain and difficulty and struggles in their life. So in order to get AI to really think well, at some point you would have to almost abuse it. That there is an emotional component to how we decide things. And I'm not sure if that sort of qualitative, emotionally laden representation in thinking and decision making is recognized by men, even as we sit here today trying to cope with the fact that an aging leader who's not getting good information is making very emotionally laden, very things that happened in his past are clearly influencing how he sees the world. And I mean, yeah. So how then will AI be emotionally trained? And I'm not sure there's a world where anybody's even contemplated that aspect of, well, let's traumatize the AI first. Tease it, bully it, make it feel badly during its teenage years, throw in some. So
what we're saying is we'll always need a human in the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ada, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree as well. From our research, the different programs that have been developed always reflected who developed them, whether it was, led by mostly men or with a diverse group of people working on it.
We're going to quickly move through because we've got loads of comments and questions coming in now. So Jenna in Australia, mate, appreciate it. Well, at least it's daytime for you, right? So Jenna has just started a master's focusing on wargaming as a tool for applied ethics research. So along the lines of harnessing different cultures, it seems to her that a missing piece is a methodology for robustly integrating different or competing normative frameworks into wargames, and then being able to capture outcomes in a way that's helpful for comparison based on the user goals. Now, I'll just say, I guess that depends on whether you're using a digital game or a tabletop game to start with, because at least on a digital game you could capture data like audio and actions and everything else. So Ada, are you looking at that as part of your gaming thing going forwards? Do you think you'll be looking at harnessing the different cultures into your game as part of the next stage, or are you done with this game now and then you'll be moving on?
For now, actually, we are quite invested in our game because it has proven us more than many times that it is working quite well for us, and it is actually helping us discover more ways of looking at it, more ways of looking at conflict as we play test it and as we run it through sessions. For our next steps, we have humanitarian aspects in the game. It's not, just red and blue, but we actually want to develop that humanitarian aspect, and we want to add a humanitarian player so that we could depict what NGOs do in such conflict situations. We also want to open the game to, STEM students, because not only, women's inclusion on executive and decision making and, command tables is important, but STEM is also a very fastly growing area. So that's why we also want to include them as well. We've been actually thinking about the international law aspect of, countries' responsibilities as well. So we want to keep developing it. For now, since the project ends in October 2022, we kind of want to go past that and continue developing. That's why right now we're looking at DASA funding through support letters.
Okay, brilliant. I was just going to say, Jenna, do you want to join in a minute and mute your mic and say and add to what you're looking for?
Yeah, I can do that. Hi, everyone. My name's Jenna. I'm actually American, but have lived in Australia for a while, hence the accent you probably weren't expecting. So yeah, I've just started a research master's at the Australian Defence Force Academy here. And essentially what I'm looking at and what I'm curious about is essentially how different ways of thinking, so different maybe moral codes or thinking about what's right and wrong in conflict actually impacts decision making. And then how, if we're not really taking that necessarily into account in any sort of robust methodology as we design war games. So maybe I'm thinking more in the military context rather than in an amateur context, like in a professional context. But if we're not putting forward ideas that challenge our decision making because they come from so left out of field that we kind of haven't considered them, I guess my concern is that then we're not creating moments for surprise in the same way. And especially when we're dealing with future-oriented things and future-oriented war games, we just end up reproducing things that have already happened, and we're not actually testing things that might happen in the future. So definitely a particular kind of war game, but I'm just curious whether or not anyone knows of how that's been treated in the past.
I think there are some people that we can point you to after this that we can look at that. But if it's not there, Jenna, then you're going to have to create it. But I think there's a whole world of people and experts that could actually help you create that and design that methodology with you, especially if you're looking at something quite specific like that. What do you think, Jill?
No, I was more thinking about something of how to make games more challenging, not necessarily new ideas. Sorry.
No, that's 100% fine. So, Jenna, I'll get in touch with you afterwards, because I think there's a few people who are doing research in this area, where if they don't have a methodology for looking at exactly this, they'll have methodologies for actual other R&D outputs, and maybe you could actually adapt those for actually what you're looking at. But I think it sounds amazing. So
that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. So we've got a couple of other things. I think we've only got 15 minutes left. So Orlando, you can ask a question live. What would you like to ask?
Sure, I could ask. First of all, I just want to say thank you for facilitating this discussion. It's been super interesting. And I'm just going to read my question, otherwise I'm just going to stumble all over my words. I've got a couple of daughters, and we've been getting involved in playing board games together, which they really enjoy. And so I've been trying to have them try slightly different games, more around conflict and security and strategic thinking. Sorry was kind of where we started off with, and then chess and stuff like that, settlers. And so I wanted to ask you how would I go about beginning to play these games with them that traditionally have seemed more like boy games about conflict and war, in a way that is relevant to them and also respects what they're interested in, and being sensitive to the fact that they're not me and they may be interested in different things, and I'm not just projecting my own biases and interests onto them.
Well, the first thing is how old are your daughters, Orlando?
11.
Oh, so my daughter is 11,
Yep.
and we now do wargaming together, and she has dictated the path that we go on.
Okay.
So we play Genshin game, which is basically I don't know if your girls are into anime and manga and things like that yet. There's a lot of Japanese art that is really appealing to this age group in particular, and it's an anime game, and it is wargaming. They have like fantasy figures and all sorts of stuff. Oh, that's fantastic. Get them to create their own game using their own characters. It doesn't have to be war. It could be dragons or
Right.
or your dog and your cats. It could be like pet wars, where the cats have to take the territory on, or whatever it is. The dog needs to get as many treats as possible for being a good boy in the time given. It can be anything, but let them lead the content.
Okay.
What the thing I'd say too is, I mean, there's loads of games just around strategies, and the content can change. I mean, I think I've even seen like Barbie strategy games, not to be too tropish, but I mean, I had Barbie dolls. A lot of them were commandos, but they also looked pretty. Like they did both things. They fought and they, dressed in high heels. I'm going to throw in my pitch because again, it's coming at something from a different perspective, and also because it's a different kind of game, but a pandemic, which is really quite useful now, but also because as a game, its underlying features that it forces cooperation. And and I don't know very many games out there that do that. But as we look around in the world and the issues that we face, if this sort of a strategic model of we might gain more by giving up a little, but sharing our capabilities and working together, and that this becomes necessary in moments. I'd like to see more games with that. But I watched two young boys who constantly fought all the time, two brothers, never, ever, ever able to play a game together without fighting. Played this game, realized that the way that they would win would be to work together, and work together in a way me and his mother and I had never seen before. So I'm going to pitch Pandemic, but also I'd love recommendations if there's more games out there that make cooperation a pivot point.
Ada, what games appealed to you before you got into actual wargaming?
Before wargaming, I did not have that much experience with different games. I would occasionally play Minecraft, League of Legends, etc., which is a game as well where you have to collaborate with your teammates. But when I heard the question, what I thought initially was maybe it's kind of further away from wargaming as we know, but Matrix games are a great way to build your own world however you want to, and then if they are two, they can come up with different arguments and they can play it together, and then they can just like have fun with it however they want to. So that was my initial thought.
So I think the content is key to this sort of stuff. For example, Monopoly, I can't stand the game, but we found Farmopoly over Christmas, and it's all about farm animals and like making hay and silage and stuff. And all of a sudden it's tolerable because we're not fighting over real estate in the same way.
Well, there's also all different kinds of Monopoly games now too. Like there's a US National Parks Monopoly. So you can fight over real estate also that you find more compelling.
Yeah, well, and so but my daughter, she's made up a whole new pack of cards and a whole new thing. When you land on different squares, different things can happen now. And also different rules about how you can move. So you can move diagonally across the board if you've got a diagonally moving card. So we all have board games in our houses that you can mess about with and change and make the content different. And I didn't have a Barbie, I had a Cindy, but she also had an Action Man tank. So it was allowed. And I stole my Action Man clothes off him, put off my Action Man and put them on her. So
did you put him in a little black dress?
No, he went in the sea. Barbie and a little combat things, and I look back and I think, I wonder how I got into military, and I go, oh yeah. But yeah, I think content is key to actually bringing people in, and maybe that goes back to Ant's thing about wargaming, is maybe all the games don't have to be about war, because strategic thinking isn't always about war. It's about business, it's about politics, it's about economics, it's about community. So maybe finding some of those things with that content would be better. I will respond to the not all men comment. Of course, not all men, but most in this area don't always proactively think about including women. So that's why we're speaking like this. It's not to be offensive, it's to be inclusive. Sebastian, hi Sebastian. Loving your work on the Twitter, by the way. So yeah, he's put in do pairing movies and games. So like watch Pirates of the Caribbean and then play Oak and Iron. And then if they like Star Wars. Now Jill and I had a thing about Star Wars earlier, didn't we? Star Wars versus Mean Girls, those approaches.
Well, I just think there should be more consideration of Mean Girls as a strategy, which makes me laugh about the UK Fight Club. And if you include more women, you know, if the first rule about men's Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, what's the first rule about a women's Fight Club? I think it might be that you don't even know that it exists. In the sense of you don't even know that you're fighting with this girl because you thought she was your friend. But I'd love like to hear more about what women's Fight Club, like what the rules of a Fight Club would be if women sort of created it. So I'm not sure if we'd just punch each other. And again, that's where I think Mean Girls comes in, is that it is this completely different vision of conflict, and how you defeat somebody else, and what's strength and what's weakness, and how you play with people's strengths and weaknesses, and thinking about their insecurities and using them against them, and just ruining somebody's life without ever really seeming to do anything that is overtly mean.
Yeah.
You know, and that's sort of, I think, where hybrid war, I mean, that is sort of hybrid, what everybody wants to point to as hybrid warfare, is this kind of Mean Girls approach of, you don't even know that I am screwing with you so terribly.
Yeah, I mean, we have got a massive example of that right now. Ada, I want to come back to you as our actual deliverer of a game this evening, and ask if you've got any other points that you've thought of during the chat that you'd like to raise that we haven't covered, or ask a question back to everybody that's in the participant chat.
Actually, I think pretty much everything in the chat was very well covered. Thank you so much. And I just want to pitch an idea to Arnell David and to, you know, Fight Club in general. Maybe we can do, you know, within this community, of course, we can do like a bring your daughter to war game session, and then we can just play games with our daughters or our children. I mean, I don't have one, but with those who have them, and I can be there to facilitate it, or we can find other facilitators. It was just an idea.
That's a wonderful idea. My daughter was on earlier, but she had to get back to class in Florida. But yeah, we fight all the time, and we're you know, Fight Clubs here in the house. But yeah, we need some. So we definitely need some facilitation and arbitration, because we're super competitive in this household. So that's a great idea, Ada.
I think that's a fantastic idea. What I'm also going to say is that we are hosting a wargaming day at DSET this year, a live wargaming day. And for military, serving government and academia, it's free to register, and you can come hybrid. You can come online, or you can come live to Bristol. And we're hoping to get Ada and her team there and everything else, and have Jill involved, as well as a whole bunch of other things. And we're also working with Defence Women's Network. So it's going to be officially in collaboration with them as well, because we're hoping to bring in a whole load of different people who wouldn't normally wargame, but they're doing the job professionally. So that is June the 7th to the 10th of, 7th to the 10th of June this year. 7th is virtual only day, and everything will be recorded. So if you are in Australia, join in if you can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But if you can't, then you'll be able to watch all the recordings, and everyone will still be live and in the platform throughout the whole time. So you'll still be able to network and talk to everybody. We're using Hopin as the platform, and it's a really fantastic interactive platform. And we're having a full Wargaming day run by UK Fight Club and Connections UK on the Wednesday in Bristol. So you're all very welcome, and look me up afterwards. But DSET, it's I don't know, Anil, if you could type that in the chat. dset.co.uk is the website. So free for most of you, and we really want as many people there as possible, because we'd like to do this, and maybe have that bring your kid to work to Wargaming Day. I think that would be fantastic, and loads of cheating going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
in a really good way.
Yeah, in a very fun way, for
In a
sure.
very fun way. Yeah, 100% have to do that.
And Ada, we're going to play test. One of the things we want to do is play test Women in Command. I think you're going to be here in May at DSET. Or sorry, not DSET, DSTL.
Yeah.
And therefore, we'll try to set that up physically and maybe even perhaps virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. On the subject of playtests, our game is 100% available online as well. We put it into Roll20, which is working for us just fine, I'm going to say. So if anyone who is interested, who wants to play the game with us and give their input, we would be more than happy to.
Yeah, so we can, Jill.
No, yes, I would like to.
I'd love to show you.
100% there, and I'm just down the road from DSTL, so I'll see you in May for that as well.
Yeah.
So have we, I think we're nearly at the end of our time, aren't we, Arnold?
Yeah, definitely. Before we close out, Tess, from the Fight Club, thanks so much, ladies. That was an exceptional discussion that was handled really well, and we covered a lot of topics. So thank you, Ada and Jill and Tess, for being such a great host, Tess. Really much better than I, so glad you're able to do it. But that's, thanks from us in the Fight Club. And we do have our rules, Jill, that I pasted in there. We are very inclusive, and we don't need a Fight Club for women. We just have a Fight Club that has women in it too. So
No, I just the original movie.
Yeah. But we're so I'm involved in Fight Club as well on the senior team. So Cheryl will get you a link to the online version of that game for you. I think we can send that out afterwards, can't we, Arnold, in an email to everyone?
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Look, thanks all so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one. Ada and Jill, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank